This is Brent.
And this is Amanda.
We are the Unreliable Narrators.
Here to talk about the strangeness, the mystery, and the wonder of Gene Wolfe's prose.
What is time?
What is memory?
What is a person?
Is this reality?
Where are we?
Do we exist?
Have you ever considered that all your choices are of what brought you right here to this very moment?
Episode number 35, The Flag. First published in Stories from the Old Hotel in 1988.
It was also published in Strange Plasma.
Was it?
Yeah. And
So was it first published in Strange Plasma, or did that come out after Stories from the Old Hotel?
It came out after Stories from the Old Hotel. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is because it was published in issue number 2.
Okay.
And then in issue number 1, it has a new issue, The Fly by Gene Wolfe, in the next issue. And of course, if you're doing deep dives into Wolfe's short story catalog, you're like, I have never come across this title before. So I was super excited. And then...
Well, he was a prolific short story writer. So the idea that there would be a short story you hadn't heard of doesn't shock me. I mean, you have heard of all of them probably, but so it was like a new one you'd never heard of in Strange Plasma.
Exactly. And then I got it, and it was evident that it was a typo, and it should have been The Flag. So.
The Fly rather than The Flag.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what that short story would be, a retelling or a recombination of, I just lost the title of it. The one where the guy turns into a cockroach, but in this case...
Metamorphosis.
Yes, Kafka, but instead it would be, he turns into a fly.
Yeah. With Jeff Goldblum?
I guess, I don't know.
So, The Flag, it's a very short story. I think this would be termed flash fiction.
Yeah, like 500 words or so. It's quite brief, not even 2 full pages in the volume. So if you haven't read it already, you can stop right now, go read it. It'll take you 5 minutes, and then come back and listen to the episode.
Yeah. So, brief synopsis. It's about a man who has a childhood friend who gets into underground publishing in what I take to be like a former Soviet bloc country. Well, it'd be like a Soviet bloc country when it was written.
Yeah, some Eastern European place.
Yeah.
Unspecified.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be a story about a heroic past, and then it becomes a story about underground publications, a newspaper service for a resistance movement.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just go through here. I've got several things I want to point out as we go along, and then I have a few, mostly one question for you at the end.
All right. Well, let's go then.
Yeah. So it starts out. When we were boys, we played in the square. He was always the last to be chosen. He could run on that leg, but not well, and he was the smallest.
Yeah. So what?
I'm thinking that there's some autobiographical details in here.
Yeah, the kid that was sickly, not the healthiest, not the strongest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sickly, small. He had a bad leg. It's like...
Yeah. I also just like the structure of this. It's simple, elegant prose. He could run on that leg, but not well. That is, yeah. This isn't a big thing, but it is just that kind of elegant introduction of detail that Wolfe is so good at. So.
Yeah. And then we went flying just the same, scattering the pigeons the old people fed, sending thin, brave shouts to the pigeon gray sky.
Yeah.
These are a few details that will come back in later, but it's the one thing, it's the pigeon gray sky.
Yes.
But then it's the old people feeding the pigeons.
Yes.
So once I saw him looking up the column, he was the only one who looked. But I never asked him about it. We did not ask one another such things.
Well, yeah, so the thin, brave shouts seems to it sets a tone here, so that there is weakness and courage working together. And then the introduction of the column, which we find out is a monument to fallen soldiers. So layered over this, we have weakness and courage together, like physical weakness and then bravery and courage. And then there's also this layer of there are things in life that we don't talk about. So when the idea of the resistance comes up later in the story, you've already had the table kind of set for you here, that here is there are things that we don't talk about because we can't talk about them, or that we shouldn't talk about, or there's a hidden part of life here.
Yeah.
And this could have gone in a number of directions. You could have, it could be referring to a culture where we don't talk about emotions, sort of a hyper masculine culture or something like that. But what comes up later is that, okay, there are things that we don't talk about because politically or socially we just can't.
Yeah.
And then, it jumps ahead right after that. When we were older and quite drunk one night, he told me the story. And so now we've gone from being boys playing, one of whom is a little disabled in some way, to now we're old and we're drinking heavily. And then he told me the story. What's the story?
The hero had been the youngest knight in the battle with the Turk. The others had mocked him. He, the youngest, without a beard. But when the host fled, with the horde roaring behind them, he it was who snatched our banner from the mud, he who advanced once more, though there seemed none to follow. Then the others, the strong, the war-hard knights, had turned in shame, so the heathen had been driven from our homeland nearly 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, so this is interesting. The description seems, it's distinctly medieval and 1,000 years ago, yes, but there also seems to be an element of timelessness to it, to me. So calling them knights could be, a historically accurate description of them, or it could be an anachronistic word choice that highlights their courage and. Yeah.
And it's here too that, because we have the title is the flag. At this point, we know that the young boy was looking up at the column.
Yes.
And so we kind of have some indication that there's probably a flag as part of this monument. And then we get the story here, and it doesn't say flag, but it's a banner.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are probably mostly exposed to flags in video games, like as a capture the flag, or as, I don't know if kids run around anymore playing capture the flag. But,
right.
But it's an odd thing, because even in our modern world, flags do play a very important part in communication and visual signaling, like in the chaos of battle.
Yeah.
And the first obvious thing that comes to mind, there's that famous photograph of the flag raising at Iwo Jima.
Yes.
And that was, so going up to the top of the island,
yes,
taking down the Japanese flag and putting up the American flag we now control the high ground. We've taken this. And even though they were still fighting after that was very important. Incidentally, like, if people have just seen the photograph, I actually knew one of the guys that was involved in that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he's not in the famous photo where there's, I think, the 4 people raising it.
Right.
But because that photo was taken a bit later. There's one where there's the group of them, and there's probably about 15 or 20 of them, and he's in there. And so that was the first photo that was taken. And I didn't know he was even involved in any of that. And he was almost dead before
he owned up to it.
Yeah. And he didn't like what they did with Ira Hayes, because they felt like they just paraded him around.
Which I think Ira Hayes didn't like about what they did with Ira Hayes, as I recall.
Yeah. And the only reason my dad was the one that asked him about it. My dad was watching the History Channel one night.
As dads do.
Yes, as dads do. and he recognized him in some of the not photos, but they had film from Iwo Jima.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, I know that man.
Yeah.
And so then my dad asked him about it when he was in the hospital. And
Okay.
he's end of life at this point, but it's and he kind of laughed and he's like, yeah, that was me. And he's like, you always told people you were an ambulance driver. He's like, well,
I mean, what do you...
He didn't want him to know he
Yeah.
was a Marine that
Yeah.
had been in the fighting. And then he kind of laughed and he's like, look, they paraded Ira Hayes around. When I got out of the military, I wanted nothing to do with the Japanese. I wanted nothing to do with the U.S. government. And his doctor was in there. And he's like, now I have a Japanese doctor. And they laugh. And he's like, and the U.S. government's paying for my health care. He's like, well, what are you going to do? But it's all that for a little aside there, that it's a very iconic part of, you see this spoofed in like CD covers, and it's a visual thing that gets redone many times. And, when the U.S. military goes into a place, like often they will occupy a high ground. Right. And it's the flag that's flying up at the top.
Right. I find this is interesting because I was having a conversation with my oldest son. We were talking about 9/11 and how dramatically that changed things. And he was asking if we remembered where we were when we heard about it. And it was like, what a silly question. Of course. Like, how could you not remember? And so we were talking through it. And then I was like, do you guys remember that night? Asking the other adults in the room what that night was like. Because that night was a very strange night. And just driving around, there were people out along the side of the road with like, coolers of beer and American flags. You couldn't find an American flag in a store because they were all purchased. People setting off fireworks and yelling and we live in Idaho, so guns out. And then I said, and that was when the flags in the back of trucks started. Before that, I never saw a flag in the back of a truck. And it was a very strange thing because there'd be these flags in the backs of trucks. And after a few weeks, some of them were absolutely in tatters from the wind of driving around. And now you see flags in the back of trucks quite a lot. And
it's very commonplace.
Yeah. And the kinds of flags, like the types of flags, have proliferated in a way that I didn't think to find surprising until I was thinking about this. A banner, in the Middle Ages, your lord would have a banner and his bannermen would be the ones loyal to that banner. And so that it stays upright on the battlefield, that it's a rallying point, that if it gets captured, that is a significant moment. Or, you brought up Iwo Jima and, thinking about all of those instances of taking down one nation's flag and putting up another nation's flag, or the ceremonial quality of it.
Yeah.
And, in a lot of ways, our culture has deeply fragmented. And so we are rallying around such a huge variety of symbols in a huge variety of contexts, where it could be that these are important things to have, important symbols to have to rally around, or it could be that this fragmenting of points of importance dilutes our ability to stay attuned to the significance of it. Because you in wars, historically, you would die to protect the banner.
Yeah.
And that's the mood that's really coming through here.
Yeah.
The story is called The Flag, but the attitude is very much that this symbol is incredibly important, and important in a way that transcends our lives and deepens our culture. Yeah. So they're drunk. They tell the story. The next morning, he has a hangover, nurses his aching head. There are pigeons again, right? There were gray pigeons on my windowsill, and I looked beyond them to see the hero standing yet upon his column with his tattered flag upraised, the bronze guardian of the city. And it seemed to me that one leg was bent a bit beneath him. So the hero, the young knight, is now connected to the boy with the lame leg.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing is the gray pigeons on the windowsill.
Yeah.
The next paragraph, summarizes all of adulthood.
Are we feeling that? We grew older and watched the dreams of youth join the games of boyhood in dust. I pass over much history.
Oh, yeah. That hits harder than the first time when I read this, which was probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
the difference between being in your 20s and being like, ah, yes, the dreams of youth, and thinking of 14-year-old you, and being in your 40s and like, ah, yes, the dreams of youth, and thinking of 30-something you who thought that they could figure this out and get it, get it right somehow.
yeah. Well, and then there's a bit of the exuberance of youth. But then when you get older, it's like, wow, there is a lot of crap to deal with. And there's, at least for me, there's a dual sense of this needs to be fixed, but then also you need to protect yet teach and prepare the younger people, because it's like, well, I cannot fix this in my lifetime. Like I could probably go on to the heat death of the universe, and there's various things that it's like I couldn't even begin to fix it.
Yeah.
But then you don't want to just, some people seem to have the attitude of like, well, I had to go through it, so damn it, you're going to go through it too. And it's like,
Right.
well, that's a crappy way. That's a crappy thing to hand on to the next generation.
Yes.
And I don't have the exact quote because this just came to me as I was talking about this, but it feels to me more like in Lord of the Rings, where it's like you can't worry about those evils. Like you just have to tend to the ones that are here in front of you.
Right.
And that seems like a more healthy response to me.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, you were talking about 9/11, and it's like, it happened. And many people of the younger generation, they don't understand the cultural shock of it. Like I literally remember in university classes before that, like there was kind of this sense that, and I don't fully understand the academic context for this statement, but it was something along the lines of like, well, history's dead. And it along the terms of, it's like the Cold War was one. There's a
Right.
general stabilizing factor that's going to increase, like prosperity will increase. But then also like recording of information in people's stories and their experiences. It's easy to get. Everybody has access to the internet. You can blog, you can have your own webpage, you can have your own tape recorders. And so people's stories would be out there, and then kind of the sense that there would be no more burnings of the Library of Alexandria, just to
Right.
kind of shorthand here.
Yeah.
And then obviously I was experiencing that in an American academic context. So it's like you got two very specific contexts there, where a child in Sudan or Paraguay, like in poverty, is not thinking like, oh wow, everything's
Right. It's all
so,
settled.
yeah, but it was a large cultural shock where it's like,
Right.
oh wow, the wolves are at the door again.
Right.
And
No, it felt very much like, bad things can still happen, which is very childish. But I mean, we grew up in an extremely prosperous, extremely socially stable time. I do remember the first Gulf War. I was in school, and I remember hearing that it was happening, but it was very distant, very brief, and fairly triumphant from an American perspective. This is nothing like, Vietnam, not even anything like Korea was for American culture, much less what the world wars were like as far as impact on individual life. Oh, gas prices are slightly higher, but then they went back down again. And but then 9/11 very much felt like this is still happening.
Yeah.
There's still a narrative here.
Another shock for me was because it was people my age that were going over. It's one thing to talk with a World War II vet.
Yes.
And it's like, they're old and grizzled and, but then it's like, in some cases, it's like, wait, this guy's younger than me. Even though I was still in college, it's like he's 18 and he's going over. And then the other shock too was and this shouldn't be a shock, and I feel silly even saying this from the perspective now, but then it's like, wait, we did what? Like, it's like, wait, American soldiers don't commit war crimes?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh boy, we do. It's
Yeah.
like, wait, are we the good guys or the bad guys? And then you're just like, I don't even know anymore. How do you?
And then you go back and you read something like Studs Terkel's The Good War,
Mhm.
and you go, oh, okay, so this complicated perspective was there for World War II as well. Because, I had a number of personal friends that joined the military, some before 9/11 and some after. And they all came back profoundly affected
Yeah,
in like, I won't talk about it in any detail, but in ways that make me want to cry. Because these are people I grew up with and care very much about, and the trauma they experienced. Yeah, profound. And then, you see the news reports and then see the tug of war between a perspective that is like, we're the good guys, how dare you criticize our soldiers, and the perspective of, well, our soldiers did some bad things, and the perspective of, well, but they did bad things, but they had to because it's a bad circumstance. And you see that playing out, in real time, not in a historical narrative that's distanced enough from you that you can have some sense of objectivity. It's very personal.
it is. And then the ones that are being left out of the conversation are the soldiers, and it's like
Yes.
they come back and then they don't always get the mental health and care that they
Right.
need. And
Somewhat recently, I read a number of books. I may have brought them up on the podcast before. One called Achilles in Vietnam that talks about how soldiers, in processing their trauma, the book is specifically about trauma treatment for soldiers suffering from PTSD and from complex PTSD, and the ways that they need to be able to process what happened to them, and that their perspective being left out seems to be a cultural feature of self-protection, because them processing their experiences will not feel comfortable for anyone. Reading in Achilles in Vietnam, he includes some, first-person accounts from soldiers, and they're very uncomfortable to read,
yeah,
because you're reading about soldiers trying to process their trauma, which means processing the horrible things that they did or witnessed,
Mhm.
or witnessed and felt like they should have done something about but couldn't, and their trauma is directly tied to their involvement and limited control. And there's nothing clean or simple about any of that. It's just trigger words or trigger warnings, or, oh, this is not PC, doesn't even begin to cover the layers there. And so,
Yeah, you have brought it up, and that
okay.
you were talking about it, and I was like, oh, this feels like it overlaps with a lot of stuff in Wolfe's work.
Oh, I think very much so.
And I remember, and I don't know if this was part of an episode that got cut or if it was some, I can't remember
Or
exactly.
separate conversation.
Yeah, but I think we are going to have an episode where you talked about it, but then I had questions for you for
Right.
the.
Well, we should definitely put that on the schedule. Maybe a discussion of Letters Home and Achilles in Vietnam. That might be a.
Yeah, because I think there's overlap. New Sun, where you have them in the on the front, but then
Yes.
you have the flag here, but then there's also the soldier series.
Oh yeah, Soldier of the Mist. Yeah, oh yeah.
But then you also have Horrors of War,
Mhm.
but there's a number of them that the Changeling is because it's about a guy coming back.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking, everything from Maytera Mint, General Mint in Long Sun, Wizard Knight and
Oh,
the
yeah.
battles, like it's
Mhm.
pervasive.
It is.
I mean, I would just highly recommend it as reading material. It's obviously not for the squeamish, or, I'm a very sensitive person. I read it as a very sensitive person. It is something that takes some internalizing and processing. It's not an easy read, but highly recommend for perspective on war and trauma. And it's just a good supplement to reading the Iliad, if you if you are into that as well, because he bases his psychological analysis in literary history, and specifically in reading the Iliad and what the Iliad would have meant to its original audience. So and that tradition of stories. Anyway, That was a long digression, I think, but on topic. Back to the flag.
I pass over much history.
I pass over much history. The gray uniformed soldiers came. The paper where I worked was forbidden to publish, and night after night, when everyone slept, save I, the trucks came rumbling down the street. I used to lie awake listening for the rifle butts that pounded down the doors and shrieking women and the cursing men. So this is an interesting paragraph here. We've passed over much history. He was working at a paper that is now forbidden to publish, and trucks are coming down the street, and there are rifle butts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so something's happening.
Yeah, there's a lot to kind of pick apart here. The thing I want to ask you, and I was going to ask you this at the end,
Okay.
but maybe I'll just ask now.
All right.
Because you didn't say the last sentence, because some night I knew the trucks would come for me, but what was there to do?
Yeah.
So when they were flying, they're flying about the same. It says, scattering the pigeons, the old people fed. So that's in the first paragraph there.
Yes.
And it talks about how it was the pigeon gray sky, and they were bravely shouting.
Mm-hmm.
Then when he wakes up in the morning after hearing the story, the gray pigeons were on the windowsill.
Yes.
So we have gray and pervasive amounts of pigeons, which offshoot here. Like, there's not as many pigeons around as there used to be. I think we poison them a lot more.
I think so too.
So because I remember pigeons being a big component of...
Yeah, any city square, any semi-urban environment, you're going to have pigeons around.
We hardly have them anymore. But the gray uniformed soldiers came. So we have the soldiers are in the same dress as the pigeons.
Yes.
And then he ends with, but what was there to do? And if we go back to the first one, like, I'm kind of curious how you would parse this, because it's the people that fed the pigeons.
Mm-hmm.
And there seems to be, to me, there's a cycle there where the pigeons are always there.
Yes.
And they're fed by the people. So that it's like, okay, the soldiers are always there. The only reason you have soldiers, you can have a standing army, is because they rely on the taxes and the food and the manufacturing that the people are doing. But then they're somewhere in here, and this is a little bit off page, a lot off page, because we don't really know what country this is.
Right.
The pigeons or the gray uniformed soldiers came. And he's like, but what is there to do? I was posing this as a question to you, but then I feel like I've rambled a lot on the question. So, because it's like, I'll just go ahead and make this a statement now.
Okay.
Because it seems like the soldiers are always going to be there, but the only reason the soldiers can do what they do is because of the people. But then the people are afraid.
Right.
And so it's like, how do you go about breaking that cycle? And like, it's like, hey, the only reason that guy has a gun is because you manufactured it over there. The only reason he had food is because you farmed it over there. Mm-hmm. The only reason he has a salary is because you were taxed over there. Mm-hmm. And so there's like a symbiotic relationship that something has gone wrong in here.
I mean, the way I read it is that we went from, pigeons to soldiers because some other power came in. Either these soldiers are from an occupying power. I mean, the Eastern European nation are these Soviet soldiers coming in. Is this, our time frame is unclear here.
Yeah.
Is this World War II? Is this an invading? I think the Germans had gray uniforms. Is this, so there's, the context is unclear, but what I read is, okay, a new power has come here, either an invading force or a new ideological shift, where we went from, this is the people's army, to this is the people's army, and conform or die. The rifle butts in the streets, I think it could be read as, the Nazis have invaded and they're coming for Jews and the disabled and I don't know, all of the people, the dissidents that they oppressed? Or is it, this is a Soviet power that has come in either through invasion or through, an ideological change, and now we're coming for anyone who is not sufficient, who's not conforming? It really, actually, I just read Polo Stan by Neil Stephenson a little while ago, and there's a part of the book that is set in early communist Russia, and the trucks and rifle, that paragraph is several chapters in Polo Stan. And I was immediately thinking of that. Stevenson is obviously a much less spare writer than Gene Wolfe.
That's an understatement.
Right. Which is why this is literary digression here, but when I picked up Ada Palmer's Too Like the Lightning, because I'd seen it in the bookstore many times, and then I really looked at that, Gene Wolfe and Neil Stephenson, that this is a combination of Gene Wolfe and Neil Stephenson. I'm like, I have to read this. Something about that subtlety and spareness of Wolfe with the extremely detailed and descriptive Stevenson. Anyway, that paragraph. So if you liked that paragraph, you can read a whole novel by Neil Stephenson. There's a pretty good chunk of it that really has that flavor of the ideological conformity through night raids. That fear. I don't know. Very evocative paragraph here.
One night, before the trucks came shaking over the cobblestones, I heard a stealthy slithering. A rat, I thought.
Yay, rats in the apartment building. Good times. In the morning, I found a paper before the door. Just a single sheet of paper, mimeographed and badly on both sides. So here we have the midnight distribution of literature, of dissident literature.
Yeah. And just in case anybody doesn't know, mimeographing is an older form. It was essentially replaced by photocopying machines.
Yes.
But you had a little piece of, not paper, but you created a stencil, and then you put that on a drum, and then you literally rotated a drum.
Yes.
And then it would spit out the ink onto the pages.
Yes. And any unsteadiness in the rotation or glitch in the ink distribution meant that it was either smeary or faint. So.
And then the worst thing was, I hated it because in grade school, like most schools would mimeograph tests and that type of stuff. So you would get, sometimes you wouldn't have all your words on the page, and you're like, how am I supposed to answer this? You're stressed. It's a test. It's like, oh no, if I don't pass this test in second grade, it's gonna, my entire life's gonna
follow you the rest of your life.
Yeah, but it was, they were quick, they were easy, they were cheap, but also they had the side effects of being quick and easy and cheap, where it's like a poorly mimeographed page is not a compliment.
Yeah, it told what they had done, which I think could just stand alone. Like, that is such an incredibly important part of any healthy culture. Is there anyone who can say what actually happened? Can say in both the sense of can know what actually happened, and can say in the sense of can get away with it without being arrested or suppressed. I mentioned Ada Palmer once already, so I'm going to mention her again. She has some really great writing on the history of censorship. And I think the key idea that she communicates, and I think, isn't there a book coming out? Doesn't she have a book on censorship coming out soon? I'm not sure.
She had the one that was, maybe she has another one coming out.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember if she has a full-length book coming out on it or not. Anyway, just that the self-censorship, the way that a censorship regime silences people by engendering fear of disruption or fear of attention or fear of conflict, so that most censorship is self-censorship, not actually officials going around stamping things out. They do that, and then by doing that, they cause self-censorship. So It told what they had done, who had been arrested, taken, what the charges were, and even the prisons and camps where some were held. And so just saying what happened is incredibly powerful in any kind of resistance movement.
Yeah.
Or any kind of just like healthy society. Like, this is literally what's happening, and it's not interpreted or explained away or justified. It's just said.
Yeah.
So,
and we're in the realm of there. So there's a word for this. I'm probably going to mispronounce it here.
that's okay. We'll make fun of you later.
Samizdat?
Oh, yeah. Samizdat. I don't know how to pronounce it either, but
okay. So it's like a underground Soviet literature.
Yes.
And like you can't just be thinking of like letters and that type of stuff. So it's like Dr. Zhivago.
Mm-hmm.
That was smuggled to Italy.
Right.
And apparently the CIA helped publish it.
Yes.
which is
hilarious.
Hilarious story. Solzhenitsyn, a lot of his stuff was distributed in this format. And so I guess One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich was largely circulated in this self-published, like kind of, so they didn't put their names on it, or they'd use pseudonyms because and
lots of things circulated without any kind of author attribution.
Yeah, and then they were very careful about using typewriters because each typewriter has its own like mechanical like glitches and idiosyncrasies. And so apparently the secret police would keep pages from typewriters so they could compare.
Right.
So it's like essentially
the mechanical patterns.
It's like registering who bought typewriters and who.
Which it might also be worth mentioning that like printers print essentially invisible dots or like very, very tiny dot patterns on pages. That means that a printer can be identified.
Yeah.
So just FYI, in case you feel like you need to know that for any reason.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Modern printers do that. So
yeah, you'd already mentioned Ada Palmer, but
yes.
This was because of the Terra Ignota, like because Diderot's mentioned a few times. I started reading some more about him, and he's quite the character. And then just the performance that they had. So apparently the secret police were raiding him because of the stuff he was publishing.
Right.
The officer that was in charge of a lot of this, like in the censorship office
in France in the 17th century.
Yeah. So he was hiding the manuscripts for the encyclopedia in his house.
Yes.
While like being in charge of the censorship stuff. And then it's like, oh, well, we didn't find anything at Diderot's house. It's like, boy, that's too bad. And it's all like back. It's just, and you're like, well, this is a wild story. Why haven't I kind of felt like, why haven't I heard this before? But there's so many interesting stories, and there's probably tons of these in Poland and Brazil and Mexico at different times with different types of, like the regime changes. So there's probably tons of these interesting little stories where you're like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious, but also probably very stressful for the people going through it at the time. But
yeah. No, I mean, funny stories are not usually good to live through. Just in my life experience, I can tell some really funny stories that were really stressful to live through. Yeah. So you mentioned Solzhenitsyn, which, for 500 words here, or however many it is, about 500 words, Wolfe evokes that atmosphere, the Gulag Archipelago, the One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, that Soviet samizdat kind of culture. It's all here, and you can feel it. The details. It's very difficult to pin the story to a particular location and a particular time, even like not being quite sure when the childhood, middle age, old age that is contained here is, but it really has that atmosphere. Yeah. And so there was no name to be sure, so we have that, but printed large across the top with the day, month, and year was The Flag. So the title of this mimeographed publication is The Flag, and the title of our story.
Yeah. So then we get it's like a rallying point, but like also a communication on a battlefield, like a conventional battlefield, what people don't think of as.
Yeah, and we talked quite a bit about the significance of flags halfway through, but now I think, what Wolfe does here is he connects this, the press with the flag. The symbolism of the flag is connected to the necessity of a free press that communicates honestly, openly, clearly, maybe with no attribution, but with some that symbolically and literally what we need is a press to rally around and a symbol to rally around. Symbols, that seems like it might be a theme as well.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say it's like it's interesting how easily the story slid into theology without even talking about theology.
Oh, tell me about this.
Well, it was just with symbols, but then also the word being an important aspect of things. It draws attention, it creates, it affirms, it can attack. I mean, so you have the clarity there, but then it's also, because then we have it's like, well, what is there to do? And then that's his question, and the answer shows up, and it's the flag, so it's a rallying point. But then what is it? It's the story of what happened. And you mentioned something. It's like who can tell the story, because you had pointed out like who can say it without. It's like you have the experience, but then who can put it into words without getting in trouble? And you had mentioned Herodotus earlier, but one thing I was thinking, like where he's talking, it's not just that too, but you have to be able to imbue the story with empathy. And so one of his quotes is, he's like, great deeds require great words. And so there's a sense of poetic that needs to go in there too, because just because you can say something but then also get away with it, it may not ignite anything in other people, and you also need to be able to ignite that in there. And I forget exactly where that quote is in Herodotus, but he goes on from there to say like, well, I'm capturing what happened to people on both sides of the battle,
right.
and there were great deeds done by both sides.
Yes.
And he says he doesn't think that those should pass away just because they were enemies. And so there's just a sense in there that just because something happened and just because you're telling it doesn't mean that it's going to touch other people in the way that it needs to on an emotional, on a mental, on a philosophical, theological level. There's a lot of things that have to come together for communication to be effective.
Yeah, that feels like a dissertation waiting to happen.
Yeah, I could tell by that eye roll you gave me.
No, but that this is what I didn't.
It wasn't an eye roll. Is probably. I'm sorry, listener. Eye roll was probably the incorrect. There was
I'm rolling my eyes now.
Yeah, now she's rolling her eyes. But when I said that, there was like it was a weighty look.
Well, it's just like this is what it is to be human, kind of thing, which is like, it feels maybe silly to even say, but also it's the most important thing, which is you cannot touch another human being unless you are in touch with your own humanity. You can't be in touch with your own humanity unless you've absorbed the stories and have the framework and the vocabulary, the language to describe experience. Herodotus reaches us across the millennia because he, Thucydides. So I was just thinking, Thucydides called him the father of lies because he was called the father of history, but because he made stuff up, and the speeches and the details that come down, handed down, and they don't have the recorded verifiability of what we thought our world was going to be like, but they have the ring of authenticity, of human truth, that there is something mythic and transcendent and real about this even if it's not quite literally true. So sort of the reverse of the situation we have now, where you can use various technological tools to falsely produce something that is visually authentic. This is a recording of someone saying these words. Well, that never happened. You had a recording of someone and then you altered it so it looked like they said something else.
Yeah.
And so it's visually authenticatable, but it doesn't have the ring of truth, because that is not the kind of thing that person would say. That is not the kind of thing a human would say.
Yeah.
There are too many fingers on that hand. It's very creepy. Anyway, that Herodotus, what Herodotus does for us is invent history in a way, but also just to tap into that thing that already existed in the human, which is that I have to hand on something that you can digest, but also contains something that's true. I was recently reading a book by Martin Shaw, who is a professional storyteller in a way. He's just a very interesting figure, but he talks about how you have to sit with a story sometimes you have to sit with one for decades before you can hand it on. And he also, so the particular book I was reading was interpreting a couple of myths, and the way that he interprets them, which is, we're getting back into theological territory here. It's that, sometimes the literal details are not the important. They're openings into questions that you need to explore. There isn't an answer. There's not a binary here of it's either this or this, or either you do X or Y. It's no, you sit with this question, and the character makes a choice in the story, but the choice they make is not necessarily a model for you to follow. It's their choice making that's a model for you to follow.
Yeah.
So that idea of human communication, we think we're so good at it. We're sitting right now in a studio designed to record, audio and visual and communicate with people. But you could sit here and do almost an infinite number of things that would fail as communication.
Yeah.
Fail as handing on of truth or myth. So now he is gone, and no one knows where. No doubt his body rots in some grave hidden among black pines. But there are many such papers passed from hand to hand. They cannot stamp them out. Where one is destroyed, 5 more spring up. I work for one, and we have already chosen the spot where we will never erect his monument. So how's that for a story ending?
That's I think it's a good ending, because, and I took it, there are 2 ways to read it. We have the question that comes up, what do we do? And then the answer, well, the rat, the lame boy from his friend is dropping off. He's doing what he can do. He's got the mimeographed paper, the flag. And so our narrator realizes, oh, I have the skill set to do this. So even though it's being done poorly, these are shoddy, like we're having to work under bad conditions. Like, I can do this. And so then the question there that I have at the end, we have already chosen the spot where we will never erect his monument.
Yeah.
So then there's a question. The question I have is it feels like this is almost passing to the reader, because then it's like, well, what can you do? And so then my question is it that he's a hidden hero, and therefore, because his grave is probably hidden out in the black pines, it's fitting that he never be known? Or is it is it to the reader where it's like, this monument can only be erected after we win, which will probably be after we are dead, because this is a long fight.
Yeah.
So is this saying it's like, will he never have a monument because it's fitting that a man who was hidden, like, or is it, no, this is a long fight. Dig in. I found what I can do.
Yes.
What's the thing we've
do? Chosen the spot, and then it'll be your responsibility to raise the monument. Okay. Yeah. So I like that a lot. It's not quite what I thought.
Oh,
but because the monument is living. Right. So where
Mhm.
one is stamped out, 5 more spring up. So
Yeah.
we're not erecting a monument because we're living the legacy, which I think is also an or and situation, because the monument was really important in the beginning of the story. They looked up the column at the man with the bent leg and the flag, and that was an inspiration to their resistance.
Mhm.
And so I don't read that ending as being anti-monument, but
No.
perhaps this boy's legacy, this knight's legacy, because he's the new knight.
Yeah.
Maybe his is a living monument of story, of telling, of truth. And so that's how I took it.
Yeah, and that makes sense too, because then I was trying to remember, you triggered a dusty old area of my mind, and this quote, I can't remember where I read it or heard it, but it was something like, people build monuments after something becomes dead is when
Right.
monuments.
Right.
So it's the people that didn't have to do the work are now saying, "Oh wow, look at this great thing." It's something that usually happens after complacency comes in.
Right.
Like I said, it's a dusty memory, but I do like that, because then when you put it in the context of, we often think of the word in the printed aspect, but it's like
Right.
even before that, like stories are told,
Right.
and it's the communication, and it's like the oral tradition behind it.
Right.
And
Which just sorry.
which just
Well, just reminded me of the stories in Citadel of the Autarch.
uh-huh.
Right. And the shields are up on the wall until
Yeah.
no one knows who they belong to anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so the monument, well, yeah, so it works with the monument at the beginning of the flag as well. The monument makes sense as long as someone knows the story. When you don't know the story anymore, the monument makes no sense.
Yeah.
And it needs to be taken down.
Mm-hmm.
Which actually might throw new light on some of the Civil War monuments that were torn down some years ago. How many of them were for people that had kind of been forgotten or could be forgotten,
Yeah.
or I don't know. That's kind of interesting. But this, the "will never erect his monument" might also have to do with his memory will never die.
Well, and so one of the things I was going to say too is, like, one thing we, not you and I, but as a society, where we talk about good literature,
Mm-hmm.
like one thing that doesn't always come through is when you're reading it, like, how does it sound when it's spoken out loud?
Yes.
So there's a lot of times where you can read something, and I think this goes back to a comment where I was saying, where it's like, just because somebody can tell something doesn't mean they can tell it well.
Right.
So there's stories where I've read where it's like, well, the idea is interesting,
Right.
but something's not, it feels a little clunky. But then sometimes when you try reading that out loud, and this is probably a good exercise too, if there's any listeners who try to write their own short stories or novels, try reading what you have on the page out loud, because there's cadence there.
Mm-hmm.
There's word choice. Sometimes you pick like a word that has syllables that don't quite sound right next to another word, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
on paper they're fine, and
Right.
if you look at the definition, it's fine, but it's like there's something above it that's beyond the technical. There's an art to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one thing that people miss. Like, you read stuff on Reddit and it's like, oh, I didn't like this. And it's like, well, I think I know why you didn't like it. And you guys got in an argument about something that I don't think is actually what you were liking or disliking, but it's almost something that's invisible, because
Right.
it's like, oh, you're reading.
Because it's invisible because it's not a visual component. It's invisible because it's an oral component.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So there's like just a lot of factors that come together. So in one sense, yeah, I do like your interpretation of it, because it's like, yeah, it's continuing to live,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, that's life. Like, it's a fitness selection, and
Right.
it's like, yeah, it sucks and it's hard and it's difficult, and by golly, what my 14-year-old me had an idea of and what 40-year-old me is actually living is so different. But I don't want to still be 14-year-old me.
And I don't want to be 14-year-old me's vision of me.
No, most certainly not.
Yeah.
But then it's still that question of, okay, I don't want the next generation to have to go through everything that I did.
Right.
So it's like I can try to fix what I can, knowing that the inheritance that I'm leaving, it still has a lot of mending that needs to be done.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, any final thoughts?
I don't know. Like, we could probably juice the story a little bit more. Like, how much can we?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is Wolfe, right? Like, there's good stuff in here all the way through.
Yeah.
I mean, connections that we didn't even notice or think of.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly. Well, this happened. Somebody well, it was Headcanon that commented on Reddit, and he's like, "Oh, the boy who hooked the sun," and he was going through, and he mentioned something, and I'm like, I think I totally missed that.
Yeah.
It's like there's probably many more things that can be said.
Right.
I'm sure people will say those things, and I'll feel like a complete idiot.
Mm-hmm.
But that's.
Well, but that also is what that's okay. So I was recently reading another really interesting book. It's called Between Art and Artifice.
Yes.
By I think it's J.F. Martel, and he describes classics. So he makes has a lot of definitions, and the main distinction he's making is between that which is art and that which is artifice. Artifice being comprising both pornography and propaganda, being things that pornography and propaganda seek to move you either through pleasure or through fear. So those are the classes of artifice. Art is that which exists to be perceived.
Okay.
And among art, he distinguishes between what he calls classics and what he calls masterworks. So masterworks are anything that is very technically proficient, while a classic is something that perhaps has great technical proficiency, but also has rift or prophecy in it. So an opening to something beyond the artwork itself. So a masterwork would be technically competent, but doesn't really admit of multiple interpretations, or at least not very many interpretations. A classic admits of many interpretations. So when you say, "Oh, I missed that in The Boy Who Hooked the Sun," this is what draws us back to Wolfe again and again and again. It's not that there is an interpretation. It is that there is such an opening in his work, almost universally, and perhaps we'll stumble across something that is very dull and only allows of one or two interpretations. But so far, I haven't really read anything of his that doesn't have that. There's some, an opening in it. I'm just using Martel's vocabulary, so I'm being a little repetitive here, but that rift that says there's something beyond this. And so something like The Flag, where he has somehow, through access to his muse, through his connectedness to the complexity of reality, through his attunement to the spiritual world beyond this world, the numinous, he has been able to put something in the work, whether he knew it or not. Like I don't think, Death of the Author has something really there. I think there are things in Wolfe's work, many things in Wolfe's work, that were beyond Wolfe's understanding. I think he understood it a lot better than we did. But that those multiplicities of interpretation. So if headcanon or serious fiction, or any one of our listeners, or just some PhD student 400 years in the future sees something, it's like, well, it's not just that I missed it, it's that you can't see all of the meanings of a classic. They're there because they're an opening to reality beyond. And so what you can see is limited by your capacity, and the artwork functions in some ways as a window.
Yeah. So that's interesting. One, I baited you into more comments.
Thank you.
Two, I'm feeling like we should this should probably be a Achilles in Vietnam, like also thing, because that was what you just discussed there was, I think it's very relevant to Wolfe's work.
Yeah.
And then 3, what strikes me as interesting about what you just said is it's almost like a multi-worlds theory of the universe, but like in a literary argument where it's
Right.
like, it almost seems like it's like, well, any good work of literature has the assumption that there's multiple interpretations because there's multiple variations and choices. And that just, I don't
Well, string theory only makes sense with 11 dimensions. So maybe the string theory of art is that there are a minimum of infinite worlds beyond it. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know if you explained everything from that book or if there's enough there that we could do.
Oh, I don't think I explained everything. I tried to give you should definitely read this book as well. I don't know if, but the book list from today's is Martel's Art and Artifice, Martin Shaw's Courting the Wild Twin, Achilles in Vietnam. By I think that's Jonathan Shea, and also Stories from the Old Hotel by Gene Wolfe. So
yeah, no, I was just trying to temper reader or listeners' expectations for if we can get to it. So because it sounds very interesting,
it is,
but at the same time, nobody's stopping somebody from going and grabbing the books and then like grist for their own mill.
For sure.
So
yeah,
and honestly, like if that enriches discussions on Reddit and other areas like that, all the better. Because I'm going to not see many things that are there all along.
Yeah. So. Well, and that the community of scholars and readers is very helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think I've said most everything. I don't have anything to bait you into another digression.
So. Usually it's pretty easy to jostle something out of me. All right. The Unreliable Narrators are Amanda Patchen and Brent Towle. And as Gene Wolfe said, our fabled shores none ever reach. No mariner has found our beach. Scarcely our mirage is seen. And neighboring waves of floating green, yet still the oldest charts contain some dotted outline of our main.